This is China's military, deploying one of their largest amphibious fleets ever seen in an exercise. Hundreds of military ships, fishing vessels, fighter jets, and soldiers launching a simulated full-scale attack. This is footage from about 30 years ago, and while that might seem like a long time ago, it gives us a sense of what a potential invasion could look like. And so for Taiwan, which is faced with this existential threat, how does it plan to stop China from landing? Well, in this video, we're going to break down Taiwan's overall coastal defense strategy, starting from the invasion buildup all the way to the landing. Before we talk about boots on the ground and the massive armada that would try to cross the Taiwan Strait, we need to talk about the buildup that would happen beforehand.
在军事准备上面，永远要想，就是最不可能的，就是最危险。
Xu Ziyun is one of the directors at the INDSR, a security-focused think tank here in Taipei. They've been working closely with the military and agreed to give us a closer look at what they say is the worst-case scenario.
大概在现代的情报科技会很早就知道，因为他如果要 invade， 他可能要大规模的动员 mobilization。 部队的调动、船舰的集结，这些都会有一个 sign 或 signal 可以发现。但是我们还是一样，这是一个 worst case。假设它是用 surprise attack， 利用常常在台湾周边的这个战备警巡，突然变成攻击，台湾还是要防護。
Now for this episode, we spoke to multiple analysts to get a general sense of how things would most likely unfold.
The important thing to remember is that if you wanted to successfully conduct an invasion, you need thousands, maybe millions of people involved in this type of an attack. So it's a major logistics effort, and that's really, really hard to hide. You know, we're talking weeks, if not perhaps like over a month, of just gathering people into the right places, getting them the billets, and then getting them onto their transports.
Estimates from different think tanks show that at least around 500,000 troops would be needed to attempt this kind of operation. Other reports sometimes mention numbers that surpass even 1 million troops. And in terms of ships, we're looking at tens of thousands of naval and transport ships that would need to carry all of those people and equipment across the Taiwan Strait. This is all considered what analysts say is the nightmare scenario.
所以所有的准备都是 worst case。那当然我们不希望走到战争，可是你要prepare for war to keep peace.
Now, since President Tsai's second term, Taiwan has tried to tweak its coastal defense strategy to become just a bit more offensive. That means instead of waiting, Taiwan has the options to try and strike and hit targets before they start making the trip across the Taiwan Strait. So chronologically speaking, Taiwan would most likely start with laying mines. Lots and lots of mines. Taiwan has been working on this kind of capability for quite some time, using small ships like these to lay mines that would explode once they detect an enemy.
And that means things like mining international waters. It's certainly not a great look. It could hit passing ships. I mean, most civilian ships will have fled if they know a conflict is coming. The ultimate decision point will be how effective are the long-range strike options.
Over the past 10 years, Taiwan has also made major investments into systems like the HIMARS, which is a very mobile rocket launcher system. The HIMARS is able to fire the ATACMS missile, which can reach the coastline of mainland China. Experts say in a full-out war, Taiwan has the option of conducting preemptive strikes where the PLA are gathering.
ATACMS weapon systems have a range of about 300 kilometers and would allow Taiwanese forces to reach in pretty deep to hit both the ports where the personnel and the ships are massing, but perhaps even deeper to hit some of those logistics nodes, some of those big stockpiles of ammunition and water, which would make life very difficult on the Chinese military.
It would be tough to say how effective those attacks would be for Taiwan, as the closer the attack is to China, the more its military is protected by its network of air and missile defense. Taiwan also has the ability to send elite special forces and frogmen, which are the equivalent to the US's Navy SEALs. But because of their highly classified and covert missions, not much is known about this unit, but they can sabotage and attack Chinese military sites.
So I think Taiwan can do things that would make the invasion harder, that would complicate, but chances are Chinese military planners would have already accepted that some number of its forces would be getting hit while they are mobilizing. It would have calculated that it accepts this risk, and it will probably still be able to launch the invasion.
But in the lead up to the war, Chinese defense plans call for a joint fire strike campaign. That means that China would launch hundreds of missiles and try and destroy Taiwanese military facilities and move in closer to support that landing. Taiwan would try to use its air defenses to protect those areas.
如果中国决定采取军事冒险行动，很可能就是会从东部战区、南部战区对台湾进行攻击。那同时，它的航空母舰或是所谓两栖攻击舰也会尝试穿越巴士海峡、宫古海峡，从台湾东部进行包围。台湾可能选择就是所谓的不对称作战，利用各种飞弹 （air defense） 或是 anti-ship missile， 成立一个这个 deny zone， 阻绝中国海空军靠近台湾。他如果不能登陆、不能占领台湾，其他军事行动就没意义。
Taiwan's navy might try to hold the line against China, but given the sheer size of Beijing's navy, Taiwan won't be able to match China's ship for ship. But taking out these ships is still a big priority, because if China's destroyers are still operating, they could protect and bring in more troops across the strait, and China wants to be able to control this area.
And the reality is that I think the Chinese are going to want to try to establish air dominance over the island and try to destroy key naval and air facilities before they start closing in on Taiwan itself.
This is where Taiwan is hoping to utilize its growing stock of anti-ship missiles to take out warships that start to make their way across the Taiwan Strait. This includes US-made Harpoon missiles and domestically made Xiongfeng missiles. Depending on where China begins to cross, think tanks estimate it would take around 12 hours to cross the strait.
From an anti-ship perspective, you need to have as much mass as possible, as many Harpoon systems, HIMARS rockets, indigenous anti-ship missiles, that you can sink those ships, even if they're decoys, right? You have enough of them where you're going to take out most of the landing ships. If you sink the majority of the fleet, then this is not doable. Then China is lost.
Taiwan can also use its air force to attack Chinese warships as they cross the Taiwan Strait. But from what we've seen with Taiwan's military drills and our conversations with analysts, that might not be the most effective. Instead, Taiwan would probably pull back the majority of its fleet to make sure that it can preserve power for as long as possible. If you want to learn more about that strategy and how good Taiwan's Air Force is in general, you can check out that video here.
Hopefully some of these assets will survive to be able to operate a bit closer in to help direct those fires that we had talked about, to make life difficult on any ships that China attempts to send Taiwan's way. But the challenge is for Taiwan, it just can't afford to have enough of these ships and enough of these jets. And China's got so many assets at its disposal to take these things out that it's a basic numbers game.
As these large Chinese transport ships make their way towards the center of the Taiwan Strait and into Taiwan's territory, many of these warships would start to disembark into smaller amphibious landing craft and hovercraft to spread out and increase the chance of survival. Helicopters would also join that push and try and make it ashore. But this would be one of the most dangerous parts of the invasion for China, and also the most decisive.
If all else has failed, deterrence has faltered, Xi Jinping has decided to attack, this would be the decisive moment at which to really wear down the invasion force.
3、2、1，水雷下水。
Aside from trying to avoid the variety of sea mines in the ocean, Chinese ships would be up against a wide array of Taiwanese defenses as they come within 60 to 40 kilometers of the coast. This would include various types of artillery fire from howitzers as they splash all across the Taiwan Strait. Taiwan's Thunderbolt 2000 rocket system and HIMARS would also engage vessels as soon as they come within range. Taiwan would also unleash hundreds of unmanned systems and suicide drones to hit incoming ships, turning the Taiwan Strait into what many U.S. observers say is a hellscape. Drones of all different shapes and sizes could be sent to complicate Chinese planning and efforts to make it ashore.
The beachhead is the critical point. If you can knock that beachhead back quickly, then you have your chance of surviving an amphibious invasion go up pretty significantly. Now, if you think about Taiwan, similar sort of thing. The better able that the Chinese are to establish a beachhead, protect it, build up their forces, and kind of surge outward from there, the more likely they're going to be able to successfully invade the island.
As Chinese ships continue to push forward and come within 10 kilometers, these landing ships would be within range of Taiwan's fleet of 90 strong attack helicopters. Taiwan's military has plenty of experience flying these helicopters in the mountains, coming out to shoot quickly before returning to safety. Now imagine you're a PLA soldier and you're roughly 5 kilometers out from Taiwan's coast and closing in. Well, somewhere inland, hiding in the terrain, Taiwan's newly acquired Abrams, as well as newly upgraded tanks, would be firing non-stop at landing ships as they reach the shore. Guided tow missiles would also be whizzing through to find their targets, controlled by soldiers in military vehicles.
As an amphibious armor officer in the Marine Corps, I do know exactly what it is like to plan to come ashore. So I have been on the proverbial beach, but it was on the attacker's side from the attacker's perspective. What we're thinking about doing here is trying to create what in the First World War the Germans called the storm of steel. In essence, you make it so lethal for any Chinese Marine, Chinese infantrymen to clamber off of that landing craft, that assault boat, because at some point they got to get out and do their job. You make it so lethal, so deadly, that anybody that survived that long doesn't have much longer to go.
Taiwan's annual Hangguang military exercises offer good insight into what this part of the defense strategy would look like, as units would also combine that tank fire with extra support from javelins and rocket launchers. Every year, Taiwan's military runs through the motions of how they would defend an incoming landing, and we can see that last part of this defense on full display. You can see in this drill that the beach is not exactly empty, and that's because in an invasion, the military would move tons of obstacles and barriers along the coastline to make it more difficult for the invading force. This would also involve sinking ships near crucial shallow waters and covering certain parts of the beach with old cars, barbed wire, tires, and even more mines. Basically, making it as difficult as possible to even take a step on the beach, let alone make it to shore. But what happens if they do make it to the shore? Well, that's where China would meet Taiwan's military head on, and we actually spoke to some of the soldiers as they were training on the beach. And the military has given us these bulletproof vests and equipment for safety purposes because that popping sound that you're hearing is live fire ammunition. Now the Army does these routine shooting exercises about once every 3 months in order to give their soldiers a different kind of training. Instead of shooting inside of a controlled base, they can do it outside, potentially where they could do the fighting. We meet up with the company commander, who explains that his soldiers have been doing this kind of training for a while, as they get more familiar with their area of responsibility. And this training starts with routine shooting practice.
我们今天用4个靶位，然后配合障碍板的部分对海实施射击，那会受到天候的影响，然后以及风速的影响。那对于它射击的精准度跟它的环境的掌握度，它就会特别去磨练官兵的部分。
Some analysts have highlighted this area as a strategic position in a possible invasion, which is why the northern coastline of Taiwan has seen the military step up its training in these areas outside of their base.
我们平常制式的靶场是比较安全的一个环境，那在海岸射击这部分可以去强化磨练官兵的射击成效。因为观音海滩刚好是在我们单位的守备地境内可使用的野战训场，所以我们利用观音海滩射击来训练官兵在野外以及自己的守备地境来做训练射击。
But this is just one small unit, and there are thousands of soldiers all over the country practicing how to defend their own area of responsibility. Now add in everything that we've talked about, from the mines to the missiles to the tanks and the drones. China will no doubt have a tough time getting soldiers across the strait.
And the idea is not to fight in every single street. This is not supposed to be, burn Taiwan to the ground in order to save it. But to be ready for the fact that, yes, some forces will need to be looking at the other side of the Taiwan Strait, but some forces need to be ready to do battle from even before the battle starts for the streets, for critical infrastructure, so that if some of these things fall, it is not a fundamental problem to the defense of the rest of Taiwan.
But remember, landing is just one part of the invasion, and analysts say that if Taiwan can identify the threat early, then its chances of repelling an attack are high.